Good morning, friends. My name is Ginny Allen, and I welcome you to this morning's program titled From Bach to Bartók. But before we get started, I want to remind you of several upcoming programs that we have scheduled. On March 18th, we will have another roundtable discussion with several of our STORS scholars. Maybe you attended the previous one we held and it was a very successful event. And in fact, it was so successful and we have so many scholars who wish to participate with us in such a roundtable that we are most likely adding another one on April 22nd. So if you remember, mark your calendars to save April 22nd as well. Also on April 1st, we will have the third and final part of our three-part series acknowledging the 100th anniversary of the Hart School of Music. And this program will focus on the future. And now it's my pleasure to introduce to you this morning, Dr. Gary Capozziello. Gary, a Connecticut native, received his Bachelor of Music from the SUNY Purchase Conservatory, his Master's of Music from the New England Conservatory, and his doctorate from the Hart School of Music. His teachers included Laurie Schmuckler, Lucy Chapman, Nick Kitchman, and Katie Lansdale. Gary is a versatile performer and educator, an active recitalist and guest artist, and a passionate chamber music performer. In 2016, he founded the Atlas Trio. He is also a co-founder of the Hartford Classical Music Academy, a collaborative chamber music program for international students. He is currently associate faculty at the Hotchkiss School, professor of violin at Quinnipiac University, is a member of the Hartford Symphony Orchestra and of Pegasus, the orchestra, which is in New York City. I won't go into all the details now, but during this pandemic, Gary initiated the idea of raising money for an artist relief fund, ultimately raising $20,000. I first met Gary in 2011 when he performed as a soloist with the Connecticut Valley Symphony Orchestra. I have continued to bump into him over these intervening years, and I can say that not only is he an amazing violinist, but he is a genuinely nice guy. Without further ado, I present to you Gary Capozziello.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Thanks, Ginny, for that really warm and welcoming intro. Hopefully everything will go smoothly today. Welcome to my apartment and my hallway. A lot of wires and stuff hooked up, and if it doesn't go so smoothly, we'll figure it out, but I'm pretty sure it will. I'm really excited to be here. The Musical Club of Hartford is such a wonderful organization. I really adore so many folks that I know in it, and I'm really excited to share some music with you today that is really something very personal and important to me, and it's music that changed history. And one of the pieces probably won't need much introduction, but I'd like to play an excerpt of it now. And then another piece that might need a little bit of introduction. And today we'll discuss how they're related and the amazing connections between the two composers and the actual text of the music. I actually have the autographed manuscripts of both pieces to share with everyone. And I'd like to just share a little bit about how they're related, the compositional style, how I practice some of it, kind of an inside the violinist studio kind of thing. So without further ado, I'd like to just start the morning off with a little music and we'll go from there. So I hope you enjoy this fun little journey we'll have this morning. So that is an excerpt of Bach's immortal Ciaccona, written for solo violin. It's the last movement of his Partita number 2 for unaccompanied violin. It's a piece that really changed history in the violin tradition. It really pushes the violin to its limits. Written sometime around the 1720s or so. Bach was also pretty knowledgeable of writing for strings. His cello suites, the 6 sonatas and partitas for solo violin. These works, the latter I just mentioned, are really the violinist's Bible. When you study violin, classical violin seriously, you're playing Bach the whole time. You're learning Bach, you're relearning Bach, and you're performing Bach. And before I say much more, I'd like to play a shorter excerpt of another work. Now that that's been introduced, the first one, I'd like to play another piece that was written about 220 years or so later. And then I'll say a little bit more. So. So that is a really short excerpt of Bela Bartók's Sonata for solo violin, and that is going to be mostly the topic of this morning's talk and performance. I wanted to only play a little bit because I'm gonna, at the end of, or toward the end, I'd like to perform the whole first movement for you. The reason I'm pairing these two works together are because they are so related. Like I mentioned before, Bach made history with that Ciaccona and so many other pieces for solo violin. But the Ciaccona particularly really culminated what the violin is capable of both transcendentally and technically. Bach was not the first, but he was one of those composers who wrote for violin as a polyphonic instrument. So the instrument, having 4 strings, is not just playing a single line, it's playing multiple voices at once, like an organ or a keyboard. And it's a very particular style in which he wrote music for solo violin that some composers continued to emulate and imitate, and some didn't. When Bartók was living in Asheville, North Carolina, he was dying of leukemia in 1944, so this is right, post-war years, right, fresh post-war years, and he had moved to America somewhere, I think in 1940 or so. He had immigrated here, and he was not living large. He was struggling. He was touring, he was lecturing, he was getting a lot of attention as a really important composer living in America. There's no doubt about that. But financially and health-wise, he was not well. In 1943 or so, he met Yehudi Menuhin, the great legendary violinist, at Menuhin's Carnegie Hall recital, where Menuhin was going to perform Bartók's violin sonata, but for violin and piano. They met for Yehudi to perform for the maestro, and they got to talking, and it's a really interesting fact that in Yehudi Menuhin's book, he writes that he had known that Bartók was in dire straits, and he asked him to commission a work for him that he would pay him for, obviously. And what was born from that collaboration was truly the most epic piece for solo violin ever written, and written in the tradition of J.S. Bach. The other part of that recital that Bartók heard Yehudi play at Carnegie Hall was Bach's Sonata No. 3 in C major. Now, what's interesting is that the Ciaccona that I performed before is not a part of that Sonata No. 3. The Ciaccona is part of Partita No. 2. But Bartók titles his piece, the first movement, Tempo di Ciaccona, the tempo of a Ciaccona. And I'd like to delve in a little bit into the relationship between that work and Bach's work a little bit by using his manuscripts, their manuscripts. I'd like to initiate an appreciation for Bartók's work. Often when I first heard the solo sonata by Bartók, I was just blown away. My hair was just getting blown back, and I had heard it, and the first time I heard it was an old friend of mine who I still keep in touch with, who maybe is even on this call, I don't know, in Germany, Corbinian Altenberger, who first performed it, and I heard it in person, not in a concert, but in a practice room, and I was just blown away. And years later, I tried to take up the piece too, and I've had a long relationship with it. I did my doctoral dissertation on this piece, and I wrote about it, and I have my own edition, and I'm looking to record it soon. But when I first heard it, I thought it was just impossible. But when I learned it and really delved in, I saw how truly traditional the piece really is in so many ways. And I'd like to instill that appreciation in everyone listening today. Also, as I talk a little bit about the examples, I'd like to show the incredible connection between the way the music can be broken up and the techniques needed to perform it well, and the musical revelations that come out of that. How interconnected all of that is, which makes the work process, at most times, not all the time, really rewarding. So, first, I'd like to show everyone the Bach Ciaccona, the very first couple bars. So what we have here is Bach's hand, Bach's autograph, and what I'd like to play for everyone, Bartók, and I just discovered this the other day preparing for this concert, but Bartók was really big into mirroring things, rhythmic motifs, melodic intervals, and I'd like to show you just one I just discovered, which is fascinating. If I can annotate without making a mistake. This is the very opening of the Ciaccona, like I said, and I'd like to first play the melody, which hopefully everyone here can see, is here. Like I said, Bach's writing for violin as a polyphonic instrument, so that would be the soprano of the implied string quartet or choir. So I'll just like to play that for everyone now. I'd like to compare that to the bass line here, which a Ciaccona is basically built on, even though this Ciaccona by Bach is really extensive and the bass line changes throughout. It's a 15-minute work, but it's always loosely based on this material here and the harmonies that come out of the implied bass line. So I'd like to play that for you. And you might have recognized a lot of that while I played that excerpt earlier. Now I'd like to shift gears and show you the incredible autograph by Bartók as well, especially when one can really take note of the same kind of attention to detail and how truly neat it is. And I'd like to play for you the top and bottom again. And by the way, so you can see, here is, sorry. That title right here, Tempo di Ciaccona, it's a clear reference to Bach. So just that opening, the top melody here, and I've seen the sketches before Bartók finished the piece and wrote this autograph, and I saw him write out this exact melody as it was conceived before he conceived of all the chords and other voices. So here is Tempo di Ciaccona opening melody, the soprano voice. So you can really see how truly Hungarian it is. Rhythmically, though, it is very similar to the Bach Ciaccona. And somehow Bartók, and he would lecture on this, he did an amazing job of morphing his mirroring ideas, his metamorphosis of changing motives, creating illusions of differences when they're all just reverses of each other, very Bachian. So there's that melody, and I wanted everyone to notice, this is what I noticed the other day, is that melody is very stepwise, right? There's no large intervals, there's only a couple, but mostly it's whole steps and half steps. Little fifth here, but it's mostly linear. The bass line, however, this is so cool. The bass line, I'll play really quick here, all this stuff. Sounds like this. Sorry. Something like that, kind of screwed up the end. But you get the idea. What I want to illustrate is the amazing mirror quality of it. Unless it's some unbelievable coincidence, he knew that the top melody for the Bach Ciaccona was based on very large intervals that you can see here. Notice the top line again, the blue, is large intervals. The bottom line, the red, is more stepwise and linear. So he essentially, and I think intentionally, flipped the idea of what Bach did in the Ciaccona, which is this very kind of plain, angular upper line and this stepwise bass line. He said, well, I'm going to make it with a stepwise soprano voice and a more angular with larger intervals bass line. And then I'm going to go ahead and make it very similar to a saraband as well. So I'd like to show you a little bit of the saraband. Here. For the Ciaccona, one thing that I like to do to approach it...
Gary, excuse me, this is Ginny. For some reason, your screen share has been stuck for a while on the Bartók Ciaccona, and the highlighting you're doing and the switching is not coming through.
Okay, let me see. I'll just reshare all over again. See if that works. Do you see Bartók now?
Yes.
Good. And now do you see Bach?
Yes.
Beautiful. So along with the saraband, I'll play the very beginning by Bach. Sorry. This sense of, now I'm getting a little bit more into the musical side of things, this sense of 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. This bit of gravity on 2, creating this dance-like quality of a saraband, is present in Bach Ciaccona. It even starts on the second beat. Here. Notice there's no first beat in the first measure. So it's 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and so forth. And then Tempo di Ciaccona by Bartók. Same idea, but in a much more rough language. 1, 2. 1, 2. So what I do as a performer trying to find the right tempo for this piece is do exactly that. And I like to go back and forth a lot to find the right feel for what Bartók meant. Often this piece is started a bit too slow or too fast, and folks don't pay much attention to the rhythm that Bartók wrote. But if you just do exactly what he says and you do Tempo di Ciaccona, it sounds right. So that's a little bit about the opening that I found, because when I first saw it, I saw so much black on the page. And then when you delve in more, it's very traditional and very simple music. The harmonic language, of course, is much more dissonant, being written 20 years later. But the essence of the composition is sound with Baroque techniques. It's just right there. A bit more about Baroque techniques would be the second thematic section here, where this is Bartók imitating what's called a bariolage. I'll show you a bit of that in the Bach Ciaccona. It's toward the end, so right here. I'll quickly annotate. This whole section here and here, I'd like to play quickly for everyone. It's a very common Baroque technique that string players encounter. So you hear how it's a repeated voice, a singing voice in one sense, and always alternating with an open string, this kind of technique. Bartók does an amazing play on this in the second thematic section, which is illustrated right here. But it's got different punctuations and different bowings. And I'd like to show that. It's fascinating. There are these punctuations of pizzicato chords that show that separate or set the harmonic landscape, really. And then, just like Bach wrote in Ciaccona, this particular bariolage is very chromatic, meaning it's very based on half steps, which Bartók would love, because he's all into chromaticism, of course. So what he does, this is Bartók's take on a very tortured bariolage. And then a quick interruption, a punctuation of something completely different. Again, mirroring this voice of ba-da-da-da-dum and putting it in three different voices and overlaying them. So that, and also towards the end of the piece, you have again another amazing bariolage that's completely different. Again, with this desperation Bartók was experiencing, being very ill and knowing his days were numbered. Here, you'll hear this in the return when I perform it later. All of this material, he has, in a sense, reversed the earlier bariolage that I just played, where now the moving voice is lower than the upper voice, the constant open string voice. So the moving voice is here lower. And again, with these improvisatory punctuations as well, which is probably the last point I'll have time to make that I really wanted to illustrate for everyone. I never get to everything. But what I'd like to show is this general idea that Bach would do in his solo violin works that Bartók really took the torch. I'd like to show it in the development section, which is here, starting at the letter A here, and continuing all through here. What we have is everything marked in red would be a structural emulation of the opening, a 1, 2 kind of thing, like the very beginning. Always intermingled with these improvisatory, and I'll do them in blue, I guess, passages here, or, sorry, I moved everything around, but here, or, let me go back to, yeah, right, or here. This is more episode. Again, this is more structured, and you'll hear the pattern. Here is structure. Here is improvisation. And this is really salient in Bach's first sonata, but in many movements, but it's really clear to illustrate here. This is his sonata number 1, a very popular work that many people would recognize. And I'll just play the very opening. Before I do that, though, I'll just show how you have structure and improvisation, back and forth. Structure, structure, pillars. And then improvisation, which the string player can really play around with as they weave this melody throughout the harmonies. So I'd like to play that for you real quick.
Gary?
Yes.
Gary, I'm sorry. Would you just double check your sound settings? Because I think when we had the screen share problem, you might have reverted back to the less rounded sound.
Everything looks okay here.
Okay.
Yeah, nothing has changed on my end.
Okay.
What's the problem? Is it scratchy?
Well, maybe leave the screen share down for now.
Sure, because that's the last point I was going to make anyway, so I'm glad tech failed us late. So a little bit of that Bach G minor I just showed you, the pillars and the improvisation. Improvisation, pillar, freedom, pillar, improvisation, structure, freedom within structure. And a little bit of that development section I was showing in red and blue in the Bartók, that he takes it certainly to another degree, but you have structure like the beginning, and then improvisation. Structure, improvisation, and then this episode. And of course, that episode is full of mirrored rhythmic motifs from Bach Ciaccona, which I would have loved to get to, but I'm going to now perform the Tempo di Ciaccona for everyone, hopefully with okay audio. And after that, hopefully we can talk a little bit, if there are any questions. But hopefully that little bit of explanation can open our ears a bit more to Bartók's traditional nature, his whimsical and structural mind, this genius of playing with small groups of notes and intervals and rhythms, and molding it all together into this piece that, again, like I said, really changed history and pushed the violin to its limits. So here is Tempo di Ciaccona. So, hearing virtual applause in my head. uh,
Bravo.
Thank you.
I'm
Thanks
shouting
again.
bravo for all of us.
All by heart. Awesome.
Well, thanks so much for everyone having me here. It's really been fun to share this music with you. Um, it's a work in progress for me. I'll be recording this work some part of late spring, early summer, hopefully. And thanks for listening and sitting through my explanations of some of it. So I think there's a little bit of time to talk if there's some questions, and then yeah. Thanks
So
again.
Gary, we've had one member write a comment, which you'll be happy to hear. It's from a flutist who says that during COVID, with no one to perform with, she's been revisiting her solo rep, especially Bach's solo works for flute. The harmonic and melodic lines are intertwined into only one voice, and the player has to breathe. And thanks for this fascinating performance. You've inspired her to revisit contemporary solo works as well.
Oh, great.
I have a question for you, another question for you. These particular works seem somewhat unforgiving in performance. If you put one finger in the wrong place, how devastating can that be?
Well, there is no art with perfection. So when you want to try to make any magic happen, you're going to have to learn to let go of those mistakes. Those are going to happen. And the proof is in the search for a great performance that has every note perfect. And of course, it's devastating. It's depending on your personality. I have a perfectionist personality, and it's hard for me to, manage mistakes, playing out of tune, imperfections in my bow. But what's really important in the end is the artistry and the music and sharing it and allowing it to make people's eyes just widen, I think. And but yeah, it's a daily practice. It's a practice to learn how to let go of that. But yeah, the Bartók is actually Bartók was really concerned with how unplayable it might be, and a lot of what my dissertation was about was this behind the scenes work he was doing. Even though he wrote it for Yehudi Menuhin, Menuhin was taking a long time getting back to him, so he consulted another friend of his, Rudolf Kolisch, on the playability of the piece, and Menuhin suggested many, many, many changes because of that unforgiving quality of the work. I played the original version mixed with some of Menuhin's solutions to some of the passage work that's quite difficult, really up here. So when you play a work like this, you have to just go for the spirit and let it go, because you're not going to get every note. So, yeah. Thanks for that question.
Another question is about the fact that it's obvious that you have lived with both of these pieces, the Bach and the Bartók, for quite a long time. So this person wants to know, pick one or the other of them, and can you briefly describe how your interpretation and performance of it has changed over time?
Sure. I've been playing Bach Ciaccona since I was probably 20. I learned it first when I was 23 or 4 in graduate school. I played it very different then than now. And I'll be searching the rest of my life for how I play it. But essentially, I played it when I learned it very much in the spirit of recordings I loved, like I think as any student would do. And I actually encourage my students to use recordings as a starting point. And then the more you learn about the work, then I went through, years later, I went through a phase of a lot of the performance practice, studying how they performed Baroque music back then with different bows, different instruments, their gestures, their ways of bowing, the way they felt the dance-like qualities of the movements by Bach. And then I went through that phase a little bit. And now, since I'm out of school and playing professionally, I kind of hybrid my own views with some principles I think are important, playing Baroque music principles. So I would say there's some of me in it, but I really try to stay true to what's written. But unfortunately, Bach doesn't give us much to work with on the page, not even a dynamic. So it's very personal for everyone how to play Bach, and it's a lifelong journey. So, but I play it very different than back then, definitely.
Now, one person's commenting that it seems to him that the Bartók phrasing in general begins rather than ends on the downbeat. So should Bartók have titled the movement Tempo di Sarabanda instead of Tempo di Ciaccona?
Or Tempo di Elision or something, right? Yeah. A lot of beginnings are endings in the Bartók, and that is Bach's signature move. Everything is resolving, and then new lines are coming out of that resolution, elisions everywhere. But yeah, right. We should change the title.
A quick technical question. What microphone do you use?
I'm trying a new one. This is the Shure, Shure, MV7. It's a dynamic microphone. And this recording project I mentioned is a home kind of, for lack of a better word, quarantine project to record in my living room. And that kind of microphone might be good for that purpose because it really gets rid of background noise. So, yeah, Shure MV7. I'm trying it out.
So here's another Bach-related question. A pianist has an arrangement of Bach's D minor concerto for piano and is wondering whether that originally might have been a violin concerto. Do you know?
I've heard something about that. I think, is it that one? Da da dum bum bum bum. How does it go? Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind is this famous video of Glenn Gould playing that concerto. I'd have to look that up. But I have heard an arrangement for other instruments of that keyboard concerto. Actually, that's worth looking up. Yeah.
And maybe the last question, our techies are really interested in, the visual and auditory aspects of your performance. So the question is, what camera do you use? Is it something special?
I wish I tried to for this particular concert. The fundraiser Ginny mentioned that I did in October had a really great setup with a very fancy digital camera with portrait mode. And gearing up for this concert, I tried some different cameras out because I didn't have access to that one anymore, and I couldn't get it to work quite well. So I'm using my 1080p webcam. It's like $40, and I'm sure you can notice it's auto zooming a lot, and that's driving me nuts, but just let that go. But yeah, it's actually just a basic webcam on a tripod, and then the mic is over here. I'm talking to plastic, you guys, pretending it's a human being or a group of humans. And then my computer's right here. And then I have a music stand actually behind the webcam, not with the music. I'm playing everything by memory, but with a few bullet points of what I wanted to talk about. So that's this whole setup here. And I got tape on the floor and, to mark everything where it goes. And yeah, it's kind of fun and kind of stressful, this new 21st century pandemic style of performing at home if you're into it. But it's always rewarding at the end.
Well, Gary, I think at this point I'll ask Michelle to take you and me out of the spotlight and put us back into choosing the option of gallery view. But on behalf of the Musical Club of Hartford, I would like to thank you for this absolutely amazing program.
Well, thank you. It's been such a pleasure, really. I miss performing, I miss people, and things like this are really gratifying in the end. So thanks for having me, really. I hope to come back.